Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's event to discuss Fort McMurray's Downtown Area Redevelopment Plan, or Downtown ARP. My name is Nadia Power. I'm the Manager for Public Engagement with the RMWB, and it's my pleasure to host the virtual open house event this evening. No matter where you may be tuning in from, I want to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on Treaty 8 and unceded Métis territory. And before we get started, I just want to say that this is the first time we're using this particular forum to host an open house. We've prepared and rehearsed, but we may still have some technical issues, and I hope you'll bear with us as we work through anything that could arise. So let me give you an overview of our agenda for the evening and introduce the people joining me for this open house event. With me are Amanda Heides, Senior Manager with Planning and Development, the department responsible for the development of the Downtown Area Redevelopment Plan. The team from Stantec, Gordon Lau, David Symes, and Sean Williams. We also have Chris Booth from Planning and Development, James Semple with Public Works, Mason Ross and Maureen Nakanechki from Engineering on the line, and they're here to assist in answering your questions. In just a minute, I will invite Amanda to give us more information about the Downtown ARP and how it intersects with the ongoing efforts to revitalize our downtown. And then the Stantec team will take us through a presentation on the preparation of the new Downtown ARP, and after that time, we'll open it up to your questions. Throughout the presentation and discussion portions of the evening, the Q&A chat feature is available for you to ask questions and provide feedback. To protect all participants' privacy, your microphones and cameras have been disabled, but municipal staff are reading your questions and comments as they come in. And I also want to let you know that this evening's event will be posted to rmwb.ca/ARP for you to review later and share. Now, let me invite Amanda Heides to introduce herself and the work that brings us here together this evening. Amanda.
Thank you, Nadia. And hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us this evening. In 2019, we asked residents what a revitalized downtown would look like or could look like. The feedback we received was consistent with what we've been hearing for over the past 15 to 20 years of engagements. Residents ultimately want a safe, aesthetically pleasing downtown, something that looks nice that they're proud to go down to. They want better access to the waterfront and opportunities to engage in cultural events and activities, things to do with your family on the weekend or even on the evenings. Our goal with the Downtown ARP is to build a plan with a strong focus on implementation and action. The ARP strategy will look to drive activity and investment, providing a vision, strategy, and action plan that resonates with developers, business owners, investors, and residents. We are asking you today if we are on the right track. We encourage you to ask questions and provide your feedback as we go through our presentation. In addition to taking part in this virtual open house, you can also have your say by completing a survey, participating in an online forum conversation, or submitting a question at rmwb.ca/ARP. There you'll find all the information you need to engage. With that, we are ready to begin our presentation. I'll hand things over to members of our Stantec team, who include Gordon Lau, David Symes, and Sean Williams. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda and Nadia. It's David Symes here from Stantec. We are excited to present to you this evening on the Downtown Area Redevelopment Plan. As part of our presentation, you will hear from myself and two others from our team, Gordon Lau and Sean Williams. As we go through our presentation, please keep in mind that ARP is in draft format, and we look forward to any questions or comments you may have once we have completed the presentation. Next slide. So what is an ARP and its purpose? It sets the context for downtown and creates a planning framework for redevelopment and revitalisation. In this respect, it is a document that identifies the general intent for redevelopment and improvement rather than providing detailed planning and design. You will see a number of improvements identified for downtown as part of our presentation. These are generally identified, and the detailed design for these would be undertaken separately from the ARP as part of subsequent processes and tasks. You may be asking why a new ARP? Several plans and engagements have been prepared in the past with mixed success, although these haven't necessarily resulted in redevelopment of the downtown perhaps anticipated. With this in mind, the plan differs somewhat to plans of the past, as it has a strong focus on implementation and action rather than a policy-first approach. The overall strategy for this ARP is to drive redevelopment, investment and activity before council. Next slide, and I will pass over to Gordon to take us through the vision.
I'm sorry, David. We did have a technical difficulty there. If you would be able to go over, maybe we just go over the last slide completely.
The mitigation side.
Let's go over the ARP overview.
Okay, I can go over the ARP overview again. So in terms of the ARP and its purpose, it sets the context for downtown and creates a planning framework for redevelopment and revitalisation. In this respect, it is a document that identifies the general intent for redevelopment and improvements rather than providing detailed planning and design. You will see a number of improvements identified for downtown as part of our presentation. These are generally identified with the detailed design for these being undertaken separately from the ARP as part of subsequent processes and tasks. You may be asking why a new ARP. Several plans and engagements have been prepared in the past with mixed success, although these haven't necessarily resulted in redevelopment of the downtown perhaps anticipated. With this in mind, the plan differs somewhat to plans of the past, as it has a strong focus on implementation and action rather than a policy-first approach. The overall strategy for this ARP is to drive redevelopment, investment and activity by providing a vision, strategy and action plan that is easy to use and resonates with developers, residents, business owners and investors. Next slide.
Thank you, David. I'm sorry for some of the technical challenges we are currently having. So if there is a repetition of any of the slides, I do apologize. In regards to the flood mitigation strategy, we understand that many people on today's call has been impacted by the floods themselves and is still recovering from them. While the ARP itself isn't meant to address directly flood mitigation strategies or understanding what the environment may look like under the flood, we are working with the other teams and administration to understand the flood mitigation activities that are currently underway, the ones that have been completed already, and the ones that will be done in 2021. Flood mitigation provisions are currently being written and addressed as part of the land use bylaw, and residents do have that opportunity to provide feedback on the proposed requirements prior to it being presented to council and also prior to approval itself. The downtown ARP, it does recognize the importance of the flood mitigation. It does understand the ability to integrate the flood mitigation into the overall waterfront, into the amenities and the recreation that it does provide. On the same note of that, we do understand some of the current challenges being impacted by the flood mitigation and the temporary berms that have been built, and some of the public comments and communication that has happened in regards to the look of the berm, the separation from the berm, or from the downtown to the waterfront due to the berm. And with that one, I guess the only comment is that currently the RMWB does have open RFP and opportunity to design that waterfront, and the mitigation, the flood mitigation and the integration of the landscape will be a major component of that project itself. In regards to the vision statement itself, it's two parts. First and overall, the simple tagline: our core, our services, our destination. The downtown is an all-season accessible destination that showcases our people, our businesses, our services, and our amenities. Our downtown attracts residents and visitors by providing vibrant spaces, inviting storefronts, and unique experiences in a safe and memorable environment. What the vision statement really is addressing and talking about is creating a reason to be in the downtown, creating that interest, creating that time that's being spent, whether that be on weekends, whether that be after work hours, whether that's spending an extra 5 minutes in the downtown, or an extra 5 hours, or 5 minutes or 5 hours in the downtown on times that you typically wouldn't. The idea is to create a continuous downtown that's connected by safe trails and a proper roadway system. It's really about transitioning the traditional downtown into more of an experience-based downtown. What are elements, what are focuses, what are amenities that are offered downtown that isn't offered anywhere else within Fort McMurray and the RMWB? And finally, it's about creating a reason to come downtown by really emphasizing and leveraging what the downtown has to offer. One thing that we often forget about is all the unique features and unique character and opportunities that this downtown brings, that's not found elsewhere, and definitely not found elsewhere in comparison to other communities and other downtowns. And lastly, I hope that the vision does capture the community comments that we have heard over the last year and a half, from the extensive community engagement that was done in late 2019 to the engagement that has been happening over the last 2 weeks. I do hope that this vision captures it, and we are excited to hear any feedback and comments in regards to it. As for how that vision was developed, is based around the guiding principles that you currently see on the screen. Number one is to develop a downtown that's focused on people. It's the users, it's the foot traffic, it's the community that creates the downtown and makes the downtown an important space. What we're really trying to do is attract more users, longer stays, and increase that desire to explore the downtown and look for all those little things that are unique to it. Number two is to foster a sense of place. The downtown has to be incorporated into the daily lives of the community. It needs to have more of a purpose. It needs to have more amenities. It has to be more experiences rather than just that one stop that you currently make downtown, or running in to get groceries and going straight home. What the emphasis of this ARP is creating that sense of place that makes you want to spend more time in the downtown itself. Number three is about supporting a variety of uses, whether that be business opportunities, service opportunities, or amenities based or temporary seasonal uses. It's really about creating a more diverse and a larger variety of uses within the downtown itself. Improve the economic reality is the fourth guiding principle. So as much as this ARP is about defining the physical space, it's really about understanding the economic realities of the world right now, I guess, really. with all the challenges that the community has faced with the global pandemic, we have to be realistic in terms of what the economic reality is. Our focus on this ARP isn't necessarily about attracting all of the new business spaces and about attracting all of the new office and square footage, but really it's about how do we retain people and businesses and services in the downtown? How do we improve on them? How do we expand on those services and businesses that are currently in the downtown already? Number 5 for the guiding principle is about building upon the existing. I think sometimes we forget about all the great things that make our community and make our home. The downtown itself does have many great attributes. It has a great community, it has great people, it has great natural amenities that to offer. And so really it's about building upon what is in the downtown already, taking some of those negative comments about the safety and the beautification and really turning that around and focusing on building on top of what's currently there already. Number 6 is incrementable and accountable. This plan has to be has to look at this incrementally. Change is not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time. It's going to take commitment, both from the RMWB and the community and the downtown itself. And lastly, it has to be accountable. It has to identify who will be responsible for which parts of it, and how does individual efforts impact the overall success of the downtown. And lastly, it's about the evolution of the downtown. I'll talk about it a little bit in the next slide, but really this last principle is recognizing that in a short term, it's about the smaller wins. It's about understanding things that will make an immediate difference. And so we all have to understand that the evolution of the downtown will take time. And within this ARP, it's been separated into a short, a medium, and a long-term objectives. Next slide, please. In terms of the key factors of the downtown, I think it is very important to understand that the area redevelopment plan is only one of many plans, projects, and efforts that are currently happening within the downtown itself. When you look at the 7 pictures on screen, what we really try to identify here is that there isn't one key factor that's going to make the downtown successful overnight. This plan has been developed recognizing the residential community that currently exists in the downtown already. It recognizes that the waterfront is a significant component and a significant draw of the downtown. It recognizes the existing conditions, both physically, socially, the good, the bad, and various elements that make the downtown what it is today. Community engagement, we've talked about a little bit already, but it's really about capturing what is important to the community. Like Amanda said, it's important to capture what was talked about 15, 20 years ago. It's important to capture what was talked about in 2019 as part of that extensive community downtown engagement. And it's important to capture the various workshops and open houses that we've had over the last few weeks, including the one tonight. Another key factor is really the site consideration. As with any downtown, it has developed over time. It's been upgraded over time. And so every part of the downtown has unique differences and unique challenges. And so for us, it's really about understanding how a lot of those little local context things will impact the overall plan. While the ARP goes to talk about things in a more general universal design focus, we have identified certain focus districts or certain areas within the downtown that we're able to provide a little bit more of attention on and focus a little bit more on the specifics of those areas. Another key factor is the economic conditions. And lastly, it's about understanding the priorities of the downtown. Overall, as we talk about this plan, it really talks about what are those things that are going to be priorities, what are the priorities of the various areas, and lastly, how do we develop a plan that really clearly identifies what those priorities are over the next set of a scheduled timeline. As for the plan itself, as David mentioned, This is not a traditional ARP that's focused on the shalls and should type of policies. What we're looking to do here is to create an action plan that really focuses on the strategies of the overall downtown, and also strategies of individual components such as the open space, trails and connectivity, the focus area, the business strategy. So there is going to be various strategies for individual elements. Another one is about identifying initiatives and projects. This is really the meat of the ARP itself. It clearly identifies what those projects may be and what those initiatives will be. And then lastly, as I mentioned, there will be 4 districts for focus areas that we will talk about here shortly. So in terms of the priorities of the ARP, the number one thing that we've addressed as a key element is priorities. The purpose that these priorities have to be clearly laid out is to ensure that there's a fair and transparent understanding of the types of projects, the type of initiatives, and the type of policies. It's really understanding how public priorities and private priorities differ in terms of their impacts to the overall downtown. It's about setting priorities that will be most impactful and really represents the needs of the challenges of the downtown today. And lastly, the priorities will set a tone and expectations for the future. While we understand that we can't make all of our upgrades at one time, as one area gets improvements or gets certain initiatives implemented, what that really starts to do is to paint a clear picture of what other parts of the downtown could expect and see. The priorities of the downtown right now is the waterfront. It represents the single most significant feature and amenity of the downtown. It's a feature that cannot be duplicated anywhere else. Impression. It's about improving the impression of the downtown. This is critical to re-attract people into the downtown. We want to change those priorities about, or those impressions about safety, about being a car-focused area or a destination point. We want to create positive impressions and build upon some of the positive impressions that are currently there already. Another key priority will be focusing on empty lots that are currently within the downtown. It needs to be understood that these empty lots have negative impacts. They create a sense of emptiness, of void, or of something that's incomplete. The focus here will be to clean up some of the downtown lots, to change the perception of what those downtown lots can be used for by introducing temporary or seasonal uses. And lastly, it's to change the scale of those empty lots so that they don't feel so large. By providing some landscaping, some vertical elements, some trees, it really starts to bring that scale back down to a pedestrian level. The facades program is currently, or the DRIP incentive program, which includes the facade improvements, it's currently on its way already. We understand that there's been some great participation in terms of the level of interest, and I think all of us are really excited to see what some of these facades will look like in 2021. Flood mitigation, we talked about briefly already, is that anything related to the temporary measures and to the ultimate solution needs to be incorporated into the open space. It's critical to integrate the berm, the flood mitigation with the landscape and the amenities of the river itself. Municipal improvements is really more of a short-term opportunity here. Things like the streetscaping, seating nodes, parks and open space and amenities. These things are early stages that the RM will be more involved with because they are municipal improvements. And through the project itself, we're helping the RM identify where some of these improvements can happen in coordination with other activities, such as roadway and sidewalk improvements. As those areas need to be improved on, how do we introduce new standards to those areas? And lastly, it's about setting priorities for various areas within the downtown. There are certain parts of the downtown that may have more challenges. There's other areas of the downtown that's a little bit more established. So far, I think in terms of the being fair and transparent, this plan will address the varying needs of challenges of individual areas. And later in the slide, we will see some of those improvements that's been identified for the specific areas. Next slide, please. What we start to see is a lot of repetition in terms of these elements and how they are all integrated together. The second element of the downtown is about the identity and character of the downtown itself. It's about creating a consistent and a cohesive vision. It's about understanding that the entire downtown is a destination and not just one specific place. And really what this means, it's about changing that impression, like I mentioned earlier. It's creating that story of the downtown. It's about that consistency in the materials, the wayfinding, the cultural and heritage elements. It really defines what that story or what is that impression that the downtown would like to be moving forward. And some of these things are done through the downtown entry itself. At the various entry points, we have identified major gateways to the downtown. These are your impressions, first impressions into the downtown itself. It starts to set the tone in terms of what you can expect, in terms of what that identity and what some of those consistent character elements that you will see in the downtown. And lastly, the urban environment itself is a significant part of the identities and characters. It's really, what do the streets look like? What do the buildings look like? What does the cultural elements look like? What does the public art look like? These are really visual vertical elements that you start to see within the downtown that starts to create that cohesiveness. In terms of connections as an element, we have heard time and time again how important this is. The connections are about linking the downtown together, but not just through Franklin Avenue. This plan does address other areas within the downtown that provides very strong connections and connectivity throughout. It's about recognizing that each roadway and each street may have a little bit of a different function. Some will be people movers, some will be more focused on cars and business opportunities, but ultimately there needs to be a consistency in terms of making sure that they're pedestrian friendly, they're well lit, and they're safe. We want to ensure that the connections themselves enforce the importance of pedestrian and foot traffic movement within the downtown. We need opportunities in the downtown to be able to be integrated with each other, that you can comfortably walk from one part of the downtown to another, that you can walk from one store to another. So with the connections themselves, what we've really identified is the pedestrian space being extremely important. It's about creating that safe, open, comfortable feel of a pedestrian environment. This is enhanced with landscaping, it's enhanced with seating nodes, and it's enhanced by that really kind of comfortable, wider sidewalks that really does help with accessibility and also in terms of the scale of people using it. The streetscapes themselves will be very different throughout the downtown. As I mentioned, different streets will have a different function, and because of that, it will have a different urban design to it, and a different focus and a different look. And lastly, it's about that safety. It's about creating pedestrian environment. It's about ensuring that pedestrians come first in the downtown, especially in various areas. We want to ensure that people are exploring the downtown by foot, that they have the ability to park somewhere and walk to various areas, including the waterfront, including the restaurants, but really kind of focusing on that safety of moving from one part to another. In terms of parks and amenities, there's a lot of parks in the downtown, and I think sometimes they don't feel like parks because they are just grass. Every park and every open space and every amenity in the downtown should be unique. It should be about that want and that willingness to go throughout the downtown and explore each one of these amenities and find out why they're different. They're able to attract different users. They're able to attract more interest from weekend to weekend or day to day as you kind of look for all of the differences in the park space themselves. The other one is about creating purposeful space. It's not just a piece of grass. It's not just a playground. How can some of this space be used for to be integrated with other things, whether that be farmers market or food trucks or seating areas for performances or attractions. And lastly, it's about creating ones that are amenities and open spaces that are multifunction. How can we work with businesses? How can we work with services? How can we work with various organizations within the downtowns to use these amenities better? And just as an example, how can a yoga studio use the park beside them? How can a restaurant use the patio space for service? So that's really about creating that multifunctional space. In terms of beautification and safety, you know, a lot of things that we've talked about has already addressed this area. This isn't necessarily a goal, but really this is about the results of the initiatives, the projects, and the policies. If we design the streets right, if we have a strong branding, if we have a strong theme and character, those projects, those upgrades, those improvements will lead to the beautification and the safety of the environment. It's about focusing on it, but not necessarily projects directly related to just beautification and safety. It really is a result. So the pictures that you see around on the screen identifies things like pedestrian crossings. How do we make them safer? How do we provide additional beautification opportunities? There's pictures about wayfinding and signage throughout the downtown. There's other elements about the waterfront, public art, and then in terms of cultural and historic opportunities also, that all lead to beautification and safety. I think the keynote about this one is that a lot of these items may be municipal-led improvements, but the downtown businesses and citizens also have a significant role and ability to participate about this, whether it's doing seasonal planters, community cleanup. There is a role that the community has in the beautification and safety. With that, I'm going to pass the rest of the slides off related to the strategic positioning to Sean Williams.
Thanks, Gord. So I'm going to talk a little bit about another aspect of the ARP, which is how the downtown can be a unique place and what makes it either different or complementary to other parts of the region. In this regard, the ARP starts to consider how the downtown is positioned within the context of Fort McMurray. We recognize that downtown has a significant amount of retail and will continue to be a place where retail development occurs. We also recognize that downtown changes. As the downtown changes, there will be opportunities to attract and develop unique retail functions that are seasonal, experiential, and also provide affordable spaces for entrepreneurs. It also is possible that some of these retail functions are mobile. So while the market ultimately determines the viability of these things, the ARP does consider ways in which the downtown can attract retail opportunities by way of improvement, partnerships, and programming. In our conversations and review of prior plans, we also understand that the downtown is really multi-purpose and that the ARP has to consider how complementary economic activities can be a part of how the downtown moves into the future. So this may mean thinking about ways in which public improvements can help enhance an area to bring back employment into the downtown to support some of those retail activities that we spoke about earlier. And while not exclusive to the ARP, it may also mean thinking about ways in which local small-scale manufacturing can be facilitated in smaller right-sized spaces, or even how the downtown can leverage the cooler climate of Fort McMurray with things like cold weather testing of vehicles or clothing. As demographics of the community change over time, we also recognize that the community services needed to be a part of that community services need to be a part of the conversation when thinking about the positioning of downtown as a place for the region to come together. Given the range of work situations, home situations, and living situations, we recognize that community services are also really supportive services. So in this regard, the ARP aims to consider how services such as intergenerational care and daycare and other services can co-locate close to major employment areas, transit areas, or retail areas. And lastly, while we want to consider the types of retail, economic, and community activities that make the downtown more resilient, the ARP also needs to consider the location of these activities in downtown. In a sense, the ARP wants to have a simple and understandable way of thinking about where these activities are located in the downtown and why. So in that regard, the strategic positioning aims to concentrate development around existing downtown anchors, acknowledge goals of retention, backfilling vacant space, and also thinking about new development. And then also consider flexibility, the types of uses that could be located within the downtown. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna have a look at the plan, starting to look at some of the elements that Gord had mentioned, the identity and character, the impression, the connections, and start thinking about how that shapes downtown. So what you'll see for the remainder of our presentation is really centered around the focus districts, or focus areas as we're calling them, as we believe these can be catalysts to redevelopment. And the focus areas, as shown on the screen, are the kind of gray, transparent areas with circles inside of them. However, they do not represent the entirety of the plan and are more or less key outputs of the overall strategy. So these focus districts have been generated by the planning undertaken throughout this year, and it's important that we also make mention of how these focus areas fit within the downtown context. So as this slide shows, the residential areas have their own distinct character, as does the waterfront, which is broken down into 4 separate sub-areas. Connecting each of these areas is as important as the redevelopment within them. So let's take a look at some of the focus areas on the next slide. So with the guiding principles and key factors in mind, delivering the plan, as I mentioned, is developed around 4 focus areas. Building on the existing strengths of downtown, the focus areas aim to create a unique position and brand for each area, along with public improvements to integrate them into the residential communities. So the intent of today's conversation will be to explore how we can refine the positioning of each focus area and the public improvements. On the screen that we're looking at right now, we have the 4 focus areas along with a general description of the vision and intent of those areas. So I won't go through each of them in detail, but I'll just quickly summarize some of the aspects of each one of the focus areas. On the leftmost part of the screen, we have the Civic, Arts, and Entertainment area, which builds on the existing assets and focuses on bringing the region together. It has direct links to the waterfront and provides public parks, plazas, and community events. The area aims to create a year-round space that is welcoming to visitors and locals alike. Adjacent to the Civic, Arts, and Entertainment focus area is the commercial area, which is a focal point for the downtown. The district is envisioned as a one-stop area for daily necessities and aims to implement temporary opportunities in the short term that can be turned into permanent public realm improvements in the long term. Adjacent to the commercial area is the waterfront retail. The waterfront retail area aims to really reintegrate the waterfront into the adjacent developments. So if we're thinking about Prairie Loop Road, how can we think about reintegrating the space just adjacent to that so that the back edges of the buildings are more activated? The area is envisioned as a mixed-use district that supports retail as well as local entrepreneurs. And lastly, we have the production and innovation focus area, which is a live-work mixed-use area that, again, builds on some of the unique entrepreneurial and community spirit that characterizes the region. The area aims to support local manufacturing by provision of collaborative workspaces and work areas. So with that, we'll start to go into a little bit more detail of the focus areas on the next slide. Thank you. So this is the Civic Arts and Entertainment area. And on this map, we start to look at some potential improvements that may act as catalyst for enhancing the downtown area. So some of the improvements include improving the major entry points into the downtown, such as gateways. So we're looking at gateway enhancements, as Gordon mentioned, throughout the downtown. The large blue dotted lines, or blue circles with dashed lines around them, are the major gateways. So we're looking at gateways on Hardin, Morrison, and also just across the bridge as you enter into the downtown. Other improvements include pedestrian enhancements for better integration with transit and also non-motorized movement on Main Street. And also smaller pedestrian movements on Morrison and on Hardin. So if we're thinking about the pedestrian improvements on Main Street and Franklin, we see a large red circle denoting that things like bump outs, which are kind of larger areas for people to cross the street to provide enhanced accessibility and also ease of movement across Franklin. Other parts of the focus area can focus on vehicular traffic and making sure the smooth transition from one part of Franklin to the next. The focus area is built somewhat on development opportunities that are highlighted kind of in the light gray dotted lines, and improvements along Biggs Avenue that leverage the new development opportunities that could occur. So we're really thinking about the ways in which new development can also be enhanced through street and physical improvements. And lastly, we're also thinking about how the presence of municipal investments like the park can be enhanced through development that's complementary. So if we're thinking about the park in the middle, Franklin Avenue Park Plaza, what types of development opportunities, whether they're retail or restaurants, would be complementary and unique to the downtown? So with that, we'll take a look at the Civic Arts and Entertainment. Sorry, the next slide, which is the commercial area. Thanks. So from a municipal perspective, improvements for this district really start to think about how we can improve connectivity. So thinking about the connection between, say, Peter Pond, the grocery store, Superstore, and Safeway, and also the eastern edge of the focus area. So while not shown explicitly on this map, there is consideration of how through municipal improvements that could be improved. We're also considering how the focus area itself can link with the existing residential areas just adjacent to Franklin Avenue through modes of active transportation along Father McCurdy, and also interaction with the adjacent residential area on Biggs Avenue. And finally, we're also thinking about ways in which we can really encourage cross-shopping so that when you get out of your car and you're doing shopping at, say, Peter Pond or one of the grocery stores, it's easy and it's efficient to go to the next store without having to get back into your car. So one of the improvements we're looking at is a protected pathway that really connects several buildings in this area. In the waterfront retail area, we're thinking about having physical improvements that reintegrate the waterfront, or thinking about how the waterfront retail area is connected to the adjacent hospital and aging in place facility. So in that regard, we're really thinking about the existing waterfront trail to create a continuous network that allows residents to better engage at the water's edge. We're also thinking about pedestrian improvements along Franklin Avenue, Prairie Loop, and Riddell Street, as well as Hospital Street. To frame up Hospital Street as a primary pedestrian connection along Franklin Avenue and the waterfront, we're thinking about major pedestrian improvements that facilitate active transportation and also vehicular movement. There is also one park improvement indicated within the district outside of the waterfront area, but it makes use of how that could be reintegrated into the space more effectively. And from a municipal perspective, we're also looking at the production and innovation area and improving connections north and south of Franklin between Keano and the industry institutions and uses. So we're thinking about things like pedestrian improvements on King Street and also on Morrison Street, as well as thinking about the connections between this area and the area adjacent to it, which is the waterfront retail area. So connections along Fraser Avenue and Manning Avenue that could really think about how the place changes over time and how uses change over time, and we can better integrate some of those uses into the existing framework. We're also looking at park improvements along the area. So just adjacent to the focus area, we do recognize that there is open space that can be improved through minor enhancements and programming. So we're thinking about equipment for kids and equipment or seating areas for seniors and elders, and really how that can improve and enhance the areas for not just the people who live there, but people who are visiting. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit about next steps, and I'll pass it back to Gordon.
Thank you, Sean. As I mentioned earlier, this open house has been part of many engagement and workshop sessions over the last 2 weeks. As Amanda and Nadine had previously mentioned, the feedback is currently on the website, and that is the opportunity to provide feedback along with the questions and discussions that will happen shortly after here. And I believe that the feedback has been identified as being due on December 13th. Whether you provide comments and ideas as a citizen or as part of your business and organization, we really would value all of those comments. Currently, the schedule for the ARP completion is for early Q1. This open house, and again, the next couple engagement sessions here, is to hopefully finalize the various district, the strategy, and the approaches that we've talked about today. We're really going to be working hard over the next few weeks and into the early new year to create that, or to take all of that content and turn it into a clear and concise document itself. And lastly, with that, I'll give the floor back to Nadine or Amanda to talk about, again, the updates themselves and move into the next session of Q&A.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Gordon. And David and Sean. Goodness, that was a lot of information we've covered over the past half hour or so. We know that was a lot of information, and I'm really pleased to see that people were taking advantage of putting their comments and their questions in as we went along. Gordon, I'm going to go back to you for the first question that I'm going to take here this evening. And the question comes in from an anonymous contributor, but they're wondering, what is the area of downtown? And specifically, like, how is it defined? Now, I do know that we looked on slide 14 to talk about, like, it showed exactly what the boundary is of downtown for the purpose of this plan. This is a very interesting question, because I know when we went out last year in 2019, one of the first things that we did was ask people, what was their vision, or what did they consider downtown to be? So Gordon, if you could just talk a little bit about, for the purpose of this plan, the geographic area that is considered downtown, please.
Thank you, Nadine. One of the biggest challenges about this at the start of this project was really about identifying what that project boundary was. There was a lot of feedback in terms of, does it include Mac Island? Does it include maybe bits and parts of the downtown itself? I think at the end of the day, the downtown was selected to be consistent with some of the other documents and other plans throughout the RMWB. I think the boundary was selected to recognize the importance of the various areas of the downtown itself. This downtown is very unique in the sense that it really does have a physical boundary with the highway and the rivers themselves. So at this point in time, we have selected to ensure transparency, to ensure fairness and equitable decision making to identify the boundary as we have shown in this map tonight. Great question, thank you.
Thanks, thank you, Gordon. And this map really does demonstrate it quite clearly. Gordon, I'm actually going to stick with you for the next. I have a comment that I would like for you to provide some comment on, and also a question. They're related, so I'm just going to read them out together. We have a comment from an anonymous contributor again, saying that the waterfront is to be used by all in the community. And I was hoping you could comment a little bit on that, as you also consider this question from Greg. Greg says, is it a consideration that outdoor plans consider use for all seasons and not just functionality for 1 or 2 seasons? Gordon?
Thank you for both of those questions. In terms of the waterfront, absolutely, it's to be used by the entire community. And I think we really have to define that definition of community. We think that the waterfront is not only for all residents of Fort McMurray, but also it does have a lot of amenities, uniqueness, and opportunities for the region as a whole. With the length of the waterfront itself, the various elements of the waterfront, there's a lot of opportunities for various amenities, various events, various specialties, and uniqueness within the waterfront itself. As I did mention earlier, and through the RMWB website, there is a current project that will be starting in the new year related to the waterfront, and that one will provide much greater details in terms of an overall vision and conceptual design of the waterfront, and also starting to focus on build out of various selected areas to improve upon the amenities, the draw, and the ability to provide for community, neighborhood, and also regional uses. As for the second question from Greg, thank you for the question itself. Yeah, absolutely, is about defining and creating space that's for all season. And I think it's important to recognize that the amenity itself, the features themselves, need to be clearly usable in all 4 seasons, and have them related to events and activities such as skating or tobogganing or cross-country skiing. So it needs to have those winter activities as well as those other seasonal uses. Another really important comment about the use really has to do with the maintenance of it. And using as a trail as an example is that the trail itself is only usable when it's maintained properly and safely for winter use. And so I think the ARP really defines strategies and policies that not only consider the physical use and the intended use, but really about how it can be maintained for the all 4 season use. Thank you, Nadine.
Thank you, Gordon. Now, Sean, in your presentation just now, you talked about the 4 different focus areas. We have a question here from Susan. Susan is asking if you could elaborate on how we determined the geographic area for each one of those focus areas. Sean?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So for the focus areas and for the waterfront areas, really what we did is kind of a two-part process. The first thing was to look at previous plans, where we were looking at the boundaries that were established in past documents like the CCARP. And the next thing we did was think about the ways in which those boundaries may have changed in terms of delineating kind of a new focus area that is consistent with opportunities around economic development, retail, and also community uses. So we're really thinking about this in kind of a two-part, like we have established boundaries in the past that were a part of that community dialogue. And the second part of that is really thinking about how the new boundaries respond to opportunities based on what's already there. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Thanks, Sean. Now I'm going to go to a question from Alyssa. Alyssa is asking, and I think maybe Gord will go back to you for this one. How does the downtown area redevelopment plan support downtown parking? And she's wondering, does it include angled parking?
As I mentioned earlier, the ARP does not necessarily get into specifics of the details, engineering details. Our intention right now is to identify what the needs are, and in this situation, I guess, what are the needs of Franklin Avenue? What is an ideal cross section? What is an ideal width of the sidewalk? What are those things that create pedestrian nodes? It's through the detailed design and through future projects that's really going to define the specific details related to whether it's angled parking or traditional parking. It's going to identify where the specifics are, the details are. And so at this point in time, that answer is difficult, but definitely as part of the ARP, we're going to address the content and kind of a universal design rather than the specifics. Thank you.
Gordon, thank you. Thanks for that. I'm going to read a question now from Anonymous. I think, Amanda, I'm going to ask you if you could comment on this. The question is, what are your plans to make this an all-inclusive region? And now I'm just going to have to make some assumptions about what the contributor had intended. But their question in particular says, what are your plans to make this an all-inclusive region?
Sure, thank you. First of all, I want to apologize if it didn't come across clearly enough, and that is a good tip, which is part of the reason why these public engagements are very useful. It's certainly something that will make sure that is more clear. Our downtown is one of the most diverse areas in the entire region. And I know from personal experience when I moved here and also when I have visitors coming, that they're always surprised at how diverse Fort McMurray is. And that's something that definitely needs to be reflected in the downtown ARP, especially given the fact that a lot of our more diverse type of businesses are actually located in the downtown. We have an Indian restaurant, Ethiopian, Somalian, Lebanese, Chinese. That's where we find typically a lot of our more diverse food, and including religion institutions and also some events that occur down at the SNI, whether they're pre-planned or there's different interest groups, cultural groups that get together on the weekends and have their picnics. It's definitely a focus for our downtown, and it is important. I know from a personal standpoint, I'm usually out with the kids quite late in the summer, and I find that the SNI Point Park area is probably one of the most busiest in Fort McMurray. And there's a lot of different cultural groups that access that onwards into 10, 11 o'clock at night. And that's definitely something that we've had conversations about in terms of how do we ensure that the diversity of our region is reflected in the downtown, but also we maintain the types of activities that are happening now. And also diversity, which dates back to our historical significance, especially along the waterfront, with with the Waterfront Revitalization Project, we certainly are going to be reflecting the important history that our region has and making sure that it's visible for people to understand through public art and through different design elements along the waterfront. Thank you.
Amanda, thank you. Thanks very much. Just a reminder to everybody, we have, thank you for all of the questions and comments that are coming in. If you haven't already submitted your question, you can still do that. Just be as detailed as you can with your submissions so that we can give you the most accurate response to the questions that you're asking us. I'm going to read a question out now that we've received from Matthew. It may go back to Gordon. This question is, can you elaborate on what streetscaping will be and what will it do to support downtown? Now, Gordon, I realize that you know, the plan might not go into that level of detail, but Gordon, could you comment on that? What streetscaping will be and what it will do to support the downtown?
Thank you, Nadine. The streetscape, as I talked about kind of on the earlier slides, has a multiple impacts to the area itself. Number one is that it really starts to create a sense of space and place. What the street looks like from the moment you're parking your car starts to give you a definition of, does that area feel safe? Does it flow well? Does it feel comfortable for pedestrians? The streetscape itself is secondly also very important to balance out the vehicular space and the pedestrian space itself. And lastly, the way that we're approaching this ARP is to recognize that the downtown has a lot of different streets that have different functions. Starting with Franklin Avenue, we know that this is one of the main arteries of the downtown, and in some extent, it always will be. What we're really trying to focus on in the ARP is to start working and developing some of that attention for areas off of Franklin. What are those opportunities that we can off of Franklin, whether it's Fraser or Manning, as we see on the figure on the screen? What are some of the streetscapes and some of the opportunities needed there to build upon those areas? What are some of those business owners looking for, and what are their comments are in terms of how that street currently feels, what can be improved, how it can be improved on? So our approach to the ARP is to recognize and to categorize different types of roadways within the downtown itself, and create criteria for it. Whether it's a separated sidewalk, whether it's landscape tree planting, and to start to define what each one of these areas could support and need. And finally, then what would happen is, as future improvements happen, or as sidewalks and roads are replaced due to the age of them, is then the detailed design can be incorporated into those designs and constructed as the ultimate roadway. Thank you, Nadine.
Gordon, thanks. Actually, I'm going to stay with you for another question that's come in here from an anonymous contributor, and it relates to what you've just been talking about. This guest is saying, we've heard mention about accessibility, as you've just been speaking about, Gordon, especially in terms of crosswalks and near the hospital and extended living. But is this being considered throughout the project? And this contributor is asking, are there guidelines being used, especially in the public use spaces like parks and playgrounds? Gordon, is there anything that you wanted to add about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and especially the Hospital Street and Franklin Avenue is an area that we've discussed extensively, and also multiple conversations over the last few weeks in terms of accessibility. I think that exactly is the reason why we need to define the criteria for certain streets. Some streets will need wider sidewalks, some may not. I think at the end of the day, the goal and purpose is to ensure that all of the streets in the downtown are safe, feel comfortable, well lit, provide a good scale for pedestrian, but there are various cross sections within the downtown that we recognize need additional efforts and attention. So for Hospital and Franklin being, or I'm sorry, Hospital Street being one of those specifically. Accessibility is 100% key, and we recognize that different sidewalks and different widths of sidewalk really change that feel and that safety element, and also creating that accessibility of it. As I mentioned earlier, with everything that we talk about is really two parts. One is the design and the physical nature of that element. But again, number two really goes back to that maintenance and that attention. So, you know, winter being one of those very specific things that we live with is that, you know, a sidewalk can be as wide as it is, but if it's not maintained properly, if it's not shoveled properly, it really does change that use, that accessibility, and that connectivity. So yeah, I think the answer is yes. We're trying to address that on every street, but we're also trying to recognize what areas may need greater improvements and what areas may not. I hope that answered that question, Nadine.
Thank you. Yes, thanks, Gordon. I'm going to move it over to one of your colleagues there now, I believe, for the next question. I think Sean might be best to answer this question that we're getting from Greg. Greg is asking, are we considering any dedicated space for ongoing, all-season market or pop-up commercial space dedicated to small business? And he says specifically similar to Granville Island Market in Vancouver. Having been there, I love the example that's used. So I think perhaps Sean, can you answer that question for Greg?
Sure. Great question, Greg. Thank you. It is one of the things that we've had multiple conversations about. And earlier in the conversation, we did talk a little bit about seasonal uses. One of the things that maybe didn't get mentioned is that we're also thinking about pop-up uses and thinking about empty lots or vacant spaces that could facilitate some of these kind of temporary uses in the short term. And maybe those things become permanent over the long term. So it is something that we're considering, and it does kind of depend on the context. So if it's adjacent to a major anchor like Peter Pond, that might have a different function than, say, a vacant space or an area that we leverage closer to, say, a Walmart or the Canadian Tire. But it is something that we're definitely thinking about. It doesn't show up exclusively on these maps because the nature of these things is that they are temporary, but it is part of the ARP's thinking in terms of how we create unique and rather differentiated types of activities within the downtown. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Yes, thanks, Sean. Amanda, we have a question here. I think that it's something that I expect is near and dear to your heart. I'm going to ask you to comment on. So the question is, why is this plan not merged with the place brand that economic development is working on? I wonder if you want to make a comment about that, Amanda.
Thank you, Nadia. I think the easiest way to probably answer the question is that the ARP is a land-based document. We are working with the Economic Development Corporation. And for those of you who are on the call this evening and aren't aware of the project that was referenced, the Wood Buffalo Economic Development Corporation is leading what they call a place brand strategy. So basically, they're looking at taking our region and marketing it within the region and outside the region. And the main purpose of this is there's a strong sense that Fort McMurray and Wood Buffalo needs to take ownership of our brand and what we're known for. And oftentimes when you Google Fort McMurray or Wood Buffalo, there aren't necessarily that many positive stories that come up through the Google news feeds. And we don't really own our own image. We sort of allow other people and media outlets in particular to tell our story. And so the region has taken a very specific and focused approach on how do we tell our story and who we are. And for those of you that haven't seen the Place Brand Initiative, a quick Google search will pop it up. They just went live last week. But essentially, our ARP team has met with the Economic Development Group. The entire downtown revitalization projects are all connected in. So there is connection there. Once they start coming out with more visuals and more design guidelines in terms of the look and feel of the Place brand, then we can try to align somewhat of what the visuals may look like for the downtown, such as banners on light posts, for example. Thanks, Nadia.
Thank you. Thanks, Amanda. I'm going to go back to Gordon for this next question. Amanda talked about, owning our own image and how the work that the downtown area redevelopment plan will do to contribute to that. We have this comment from Jordan. It's a question, actually. Jordan says, we need a landmark that identifies downtown Wood Buffalo. Are there any plans for that? Gordon.
Just before I get to that question, maybe just to touch a little bit more on the response Amanda just provided also. As Amanda mentioned, we have had a chance to look at that branding and participate that early on in the process when it was still a draft. I think where we got a lot of great feedback was that there was a lot of alignment in it in terms of what is the story that's being that we're trying to tell about the downtown. What is the elements about the downtown that we want to see, that we want to be consistent, that we want to brand. And so I think there was a lot of consistency through it. As that plan becomes more firm, it will be more integrated, whether it's the color and the theming, whether it's the strategy and the approach. So there's many elements on there that will be brought into the final ARP document itself. Nadine, in terms of the second question that you asked, absolutely. I think that's where, from the presentation, we're really starting that idea of that impression and also that identity and the character part of it. From the starting point, recognizing that gateways into the downtown are really important. It's about introducing and inviting you into a special area. It's about letting you know that you're now into a different space. In terms of the character, the theming, these are things that are going to develop over time. One of the things that we've been really cautious about is to not introduce a tacky or an unauthentic theme or character. I think when we start to do that, it becomes too highlighted, or there's certain elements that become too prominent. So in a situation like that, if it doesn't have a very specific item to build that character off of, I think it needs to be natural. I think it needs to be organic. And in that sense, I think consistency in terms of, things that have been identified through that facade incentives, what are things being done and what are initiatives and what are those thoughts in terms of these business fronts that will make everything look clean, inviting, safe. That in itself is a theme and character. So yeah, I think, two parts to that answer. One is, yes, we've identified areas and recommendations that needs to build upon that identity and character for the entire downtown. And number two is that there's already things happening that's going to, number one, clean up some of the facades, clean up some of the streetscapes, and then through that, as those projects progress, you'll start to see some of that consistency and cohesiveness start flowing through the entire downtown itself. Great question.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that, Gordon. Next, I think I'm going to ask Chris if he could provide comment on this next question that's come in from somebody anonymous who's joined us this evening. And Chris, please feel free if you would like to ask one of your colleagues in engineering maybe or public works to add to this. But the question, Chris, is why do this now when the town and region is suffering? And they've, just put in brackets, reference the flood, the pandemic environment that we find ourselves in now. So why do this now, Chris?
Thanks, Nadia, and thank you to Anonymous. It's a really insightful question to ask. And I'm sure there's probably a lot of people who are asking that very same question. From our perspective, I think the need to be able to support that continued growth of downtown, you know, you're right, businesses are hurting right now. And what better time to potentially introduce or lay the framework or the foundation for their success than right now, so that by the time we get through the flood, by the time we get through COVID, we have that foundation set and ready to go, so that those businesses are able to hit the ground running, so to speak. So I personally think that that it's probably a very good time to be able to undertake that work, not only so that we lay that foundation for their success, but because we're also still going through those phases of recovery from the flood. So that work is able to seamlessly transition directly into this work with very little delay. So it ends up being a very responsive plan in the here and now. Thank you, Nadia, and thank you for that question.
Thanks, Chris. You had some really excellent points there. Thank you for that. I'm going to go back to Gordon, I believe, now. Gordon, we really have you in the hot seat this evening. We have a question here from Tina, and Tina is asking, what type of public art is the downtown area redevelopment plan proposing? Gordon.
In terms of the ARP, what we're really trying to do through this is to identify where public art locations can happen and define what type of public arts should be included in the downtown. There are other projects and other priorities in the community that will actually identify what type of public art. But I think at the end of the day, the ARP, like I mentioned earlier, starts to set a tone in terms of that character, that story. And so I hope that some of the ARP recommendations in terms of that identity and character will start to influence some of the public art that will be found throughout the downtown itself. Great question, but yeah, definitely that will be a continued, I guess, conversation, and hopefully that, you know, through that public art, we see consistency and we see a story being told in the downtown. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. And I know that right now the municipality has been engaging, and we're in the final stages of developing a public art plan for the region. That's being informed very much by a culture plan that we have in place. So I know that you know, you've been working with the people who are involved in developing the public art plan. So I really look forward to this being in sync. The public art, how we put it in the places where it lives in the region, and how that's going to fit into the downtown area redevelopment plan. Thanks for that, Gordon. I'm just going to make a comment on a question that's come in from Anonymous, inquiring how many people have provided feedback. So I'm just going to take that one myself to make a comment on that. We haven't completed the engagement yet, but what we are committed to is being absolutely transparent about all of the engagement that we've gotten, the sources it's come in from, and we will be posting a full comprehensive engagement summary on all of the ways and all of the numbers of people that have informed development of this plan through the different engagement tactics that we've used. So we will be making that available on Participate, on our Participate website. You'll be able to find that there. Thank you for the question. I'm going to go back to maybe back to Gordon again. Gordon, you can let me know if this is something that you will tackle. A question from Mohammed. Mohammed is asking, how can the new downtown area redevelopment plan support local businesses?
Thank you, Nadia. So I think two-part response. I'm going to answer it, and then I'm going to pass it off to David or to Sean, I'm sorry, to also add some insight to it. when we looked at the downtown, it was really about the idea of how do we activate various areas, and that activation from some regards starts at some of the municipal improvements that we've talked about. So taking some of that attention off of Franklin Avenue and providing some of those opportunities to the other areas. There's a couple areas within the downtown that we see a lot of opportunities that need to be activated. McDonald Avenue being one of them, Biggs Avenue being one of them. Just looking for some example, Fraser and Manning. These are some of those areas that are sometimes a little bit underutilized because they are not necessarily on Franklin, or that they don't have the frontage as much as some of the other businesses throughout downtown. So I think in that sense, what we're doing is trying to recognize where some of those really strong areas in the downtown are, but really trying to provide some of the recommendations and initiatives to activate other areas within the downtown. Sean being brought onto this project as that specialty in terms of the economic side and the business initiative and strategy side. I'm going to let David maybe add. I'm going to let Sean add to those to that comment.
Sure. No problem. Thanks for the question. In terms of businesses, I think it depends on the types of businesses that we're really talking about. You have your mom and pop shops, you have kind of more legacy businesses, big box stores. So it really kind of depends on that context. One of the things the ARP tries to do is really think about the existing kind of context of economic development within the region. So what areas are being targeted in terms of the kind of potential opportunities for the future? Which industries are going to kind of make up the overall economic structure of the region? And then also, which of those can actually be effectively located in the downtown? So the ARP really tries to align as much as possible existing policy context, and then take that economic development strategy and land it on the ground. So that's one aspect. I think another aspect is really thinking about it from the land use perspective. Gordon had mentioned this in terms of activating different areas. In terms of activation, really thinking about the ways in which people travel through the downtown. So if we're talking about, let's say, the Civic Arts and Entertainment area, what are we leveraging? Well, we're really leveraging the presence of hotels. We're thinking about the Boomtown Casino. We're thinking about the proximity to the shopping mall. We're also thinking about the opportunities for further developments in the future. So if we're thinking about opportunities for further development in the future, they should be essentially complementary. So we're thinking about restaurants and how those could be complementary to the hotels, or how they could build on the presence of pubs and things like that. So in a sense, it's kind of two-part. The first is really thinking about what the existing strategies are for economic development and landing those on the ground. And the second part is really thinking about the existing strengths of the downtown and how different uses coalesce into opportunities for further development. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Gordon. Just a reminder, while we have a little less than 10 minutes left in our time this evening, I just want to remind people that we do have that online survey open, and that's going to be open until December 13th. Please go to rmwb.ca/ARP to find the survey and forum and a place where you can ask questions. In the meantime, we do still have questions coming in, and I'm going to ask Amanda to address this question from Corrine. And Corrine, I certainly hope that I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Corrine is wondering, what makes you think a park would work when the SNI is right there and when an arena didn't work?
Thank you, Nadia, and thank you, Corinne, for your question. I'm assuming by park you're referring to the Franklin and Main Park, so I'll answer it from that perspective. The SNI Park is mainly more of in a naturalized environment. It's along the waterfront, and it's more of a specific destination that you would drive to. The park at Franklin and Main is intended to be an urban park that is somewhat sort of an area where you may stop off a long route to somewhere else in the downtown. We are hoping near its completion that in of itself, it will be a destination park, but generally urban parks in cities are meant to be sort of complementary to the area. And to your point about the arena, there have been various attempts over the years to try to bring our downtown to a spot or a place where people actually want to spend time. And so this is an effort in doing that. We have to try what we can. We're hopeful that this park will add some interest to the area and will kind of bring something or a different element that's not currently down there. I have been part of a lot of the internal meetings on the park myself, and we're really pushing for it to be an all year round type of space that definitely offers different things throughout the different seasons. That's something that Fort McMurray, I believe, needs. When you look at all of our other parks, including the SNI, we have some great outdoor parks, better than a lot of cities and communities across Canada. But where we do need to improve is the accessibility to those parks in the winter months. And hopefully through this park design, we'll see that. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Thank you for that. I'm going to go back to Gordon now. Gordon, the question is, how will you determine, or how have you determined, what will be prioritized?
The prioritization is still something that we're working through in terms of what, as we talked about earlier today, it's about fairness, it's about equitable, and it's about balancing it throughout the downtown. I think, as I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest challenges with the downtown, it is a significantly large downtown when you compare it to other communities and other areas. One of the reasons for the focus areas and the different districts themselves is to be able to not only prioritize the downtown itself, but also to provide some prioritizing in each area. Of the 4 areas that we have identified, there are going to be some areas that are more established or don't need as much, and other areas that require a greater amount of activation and greater amounts of opportunities to utilize some of the spaces that aren't currently efficiently used. And so through that process, because of the understanding from the community and the importance of various things like beautification, things like creating that better impression or changing that impression, items related to safety, those are things that are going to be prioritized throughout the entire downtown in all 4 areas. After that, we will have to start looking, and we will start looking at more details of the projects within each area, prioritizing them within each area, and then finally taking that and prioritizing it to the greater context of the entire downtown itself. Thank you for that question. It's definitely something that we've been talking with the community about in the last 2 weeks, and definitely something that helps us explain in terms of the districts themselves. So that's a great question.
Thank you, Gordon. I'm going to ask Sean. I think we might have just cut off the very end of your answer there. You were talking about how this is certainly something that's important to us, and we're going to be talking more about this as we finalize the downtown area redevelopment plan. I have time, I think, for one more question here, and I'm going to ask Sean to talk about this. The question is, how does this new plan support all demographics in our region? Sean, can you comment on that for us?
Sure. Thanks for the question. I think in a way what the plan tries to offer is positioning the downtown in relation to its place in the region. So thinking about the retail uses, economic uses, and community uses that may pertain to a different age group or age bracket. So in terms of community uses, perhaps it's daycare for a young family, or for an elderly couple, it could be more on the intergenerational care. So I think we're doing our best to really think about the users of the downtown not being just located in the downtown, but throughout the region, and also thinking about what can support those different demographics throughout the built environment. Again, whether it's the types of shopping areas that we have, or the types of shopping functions that we have in the downtown, the types of employment and training that's possible throughout the downtown, and also the community uses. So that is kind of the building blocks of the downtown, but we also have the physical environment. Gordon had mentioned universal design, and how we try our best to really think about the ways in which we can leverage the proximity to, say, the extended care facility, or the aging in place facility in the hospital, with the adjacent big box area, the waterfront area, but also not just there, thinking about the residential areas, and really thinking about ways in which those allow people to age in place over time. So it is something that the ARP does consider. And surely, as part of the ARP, in terms of implementation, it's likely that there'll be follow-up work. So one of the policy recommendations will probably be thinking about how we can best address demographic questions, or address questions of demographics kind of throughout all the planning processes. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Thanks, Sean. Thanks for going through all of that for us. Amanda, I have a question here for you, and I think Amanda's going to have the last question of the evening. This is a great one. So this comes in from Anonymous and is asking, what we've been talking, about plans and projects and priorities. So this question is asking, what guarantee is there that the municipality will properly maintain and budget for any of these projects once they're handed over? And by handed over, I guess they mean once the projects are complete. Amanda, can you comment on that?
Thank you, Nadia, and thank you for the question. I've been with the municipality for 13 years, and there definitely has been a lot of attempts to do downtown improvement. And in terms of the guarantee of maintenance, I think the biggest thing is actually getting it done. Implementing actions that are identified in the area redevelopment plan, and then moving forward to make sure that we're integrating them in our downtown in a timely fashion. At the end of the day, as much effort as we are putting into the ARP and other plans, it doesn't really matter. What matters is what's on the ground, what has actually been implemented, and what did we really do within the downtown. That's where you get your biggest measure of success. And that's what we need to keep our eye on. And for this ARP, an important piece of that is the implementation plan, to give us the ability to actually get construction and implementation completed, or at least started. And from then on, it's the municipality's responsibility to ensure that those areas are maintained for the future and hopefully approved upon, and that we're continuously adding to the downtown. Thank you.
Amanda, thank you. Thanks very much for that. It looks like, well, we've come to the end of our time. We're actually a few minutes over, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time and draw this virtual open house to a close this evening. But everyone, I want to encourage you, please, to visit rmwb.ca/ARP. We've all said that a few times now this evening. There you'll be able to fill out the online survey, you can participate in a forum, and you can submit your questions in the Q&A section. Just before we wrap up for the evening, I'm just going to check and see if Amanda wanted to add any other closing comments, and want to remind everybody too that after we wrap up the event this evening, this whole presentation will be available in its entirety on that same website that we've been talking about. And you'll be able to go in there, review, share, encourage your friends to take part and to participate. But Amanda, before we completely draw the evening to a close, did you have any final comments that you wanted to make about the downtown area redevelopment plan?
Thanks, Nadia. I think, you know, in general, this conversation tonight has been really useful. There's been a lot of questions that came in regarding different elements that impact the downtown and our region. And I'm excited to see, you know, the full roster of those questions, because it really does help us, even if some of them weren't answered, it actually helps us to understand what our residents are saying and thinking about, and taking a look at that for the ARP through that lens will help us. You know, over the years, there have been a lot of action in terms of trying to get that right plan. And through this process of our new area redevelopment plan, I actually came across quite an old document 30 years ago, I believe, 20 to 30 years ago. And it was about the downtown. And as I was reading through it, I couldn't believe the consistency in information that has been collected over the years from residents, even though technology and, you know, people change, and at the end of the day, like, we really are asking for a lot of the same elements. And so, you know, right now, this part of this engagement is going back to our residents to ask, are we getting it right? Are we on the right track? And I mentioned this earlier, the main thing is that we actually start making improvements and moving on things. You know, you think big, but act small. And it's those small acts that will help our downtown become a better place that people want to go to. And I just want to quickly also touch on the fact that there are other actions happening right now concurrently to the ARP. We are not waiting for the ARP to be complete before we move on certain pieces. And one example of that is the Downtown Revitalization Incentive Program, which is a series of different grants available to businesses and building owners in the downtown. We have seen 15 applications be approved, and through those applications, it has attracted new businesses to the downtown, and it's kept some of our businesses here as well. So for me, it just sort of highlights the fact that people are willing to still invest in the downtown and take a shot at it and open business and keep their business open for the public. You know, another example is the recent opening of Dollarama. Even though it's a franchise store and a national brand, it's still a business that is downtown. It's employing local people, and more importantly, it's drawing people into the core. You know, they're open 10 p.m. at night. You go there at 9:45. There's people shopping at Dollarama. So to me, it just says that if there's something that people want to go to that draws them into the core, they'll go. And that's part of what we're doing here, is what are those things, and trying to layer them upon each other to make a healthy downtown for our region. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you to all of our presenters, and thank you to everyone for taking the time to join us. We're really happy that you chose to spend this time with us this evening at our virtual open house. Good night.